Hi there and welcome to this National 4 Maths lesson at Penguin Learning, where we will be looking at the second part of our lesson on equations. We'll be looking at more examples involving brackets and how we can get rid of brackets, particularly when we're looking to solve an equation. And when we do so, we will also be looking at how we can use squared values and square root values when solving an equation. But the focus on this lesson in particular is going to look at how we can simplify an equation that will allow us to bring all of the numbers over to the right hand side, and we do this using a thing called BODMAS. And then finally we will look at a few examples that will really challenge our knowledge on how to solve an equation. So let's get started.
Ooh la la!
So, in the last lesson, we learned that when we want to solve an equation for a variable x, what we have to do is keep all the letters to the left hand side and bring all of the numbers to the right hand side. And we can see here in this example what we've done, we've brought this plus 2 over to the right hand side, as we can see here, and doing so means that when it moves over to the other side we change the sign and plus becomes minus. And we learned that if we have a number that's being multiplied by the variable, so here we have 2x, what we have to do is bring this 2 over to the other side, and because it's multiplying the x on this side, when we take it over, it's going to be dividing, as we can see here, and that results in 16 being divided by a 2, which gives us an x equals 8. Let's have a look at this example here. So we've been asked to solve for x, and the equation we have is 0.25x is equal to 8. So we know what we want to do is have the letter by itself on the left hand side and all of the other numbers on the right hand side. But how do we do it for this problem? Well, we know that on the left hand side this can be written as 0.25 multiplied by x is equal to 8. And we know that if something's being multiplied on one side and we want to bring it over, then that means when we bring this 0.25 over to this side, we're going to divide by this. So that means our equation will look like this. We will have 8 divided by 0.25. Now this is the sort of question we might get asked to not use a calculator for, and you might think, how do we go about doing this? How do we divide something by 0.25? Well, what we can do is we can convert this 0.25 into a fraction form, because just now it's in a decimal, and if we convert this into a fraction, it means we can solve this a little bit easier. And the way we do this is, if we write 0.25 over 1, and then what we want to do now to get this into a proper fraction is to get the number on the top equal to 1. And to do that, what we have to do is times the top and the bottom part of the fraction by 4. So 0.25, if we multiply that by 4, that gets us a value of 1. And what we do to the top, we must also do to the bottom, and that means 1 times 4 is equal to 4. And that means that 1 over 4, or 1/4, is equal to this 0.25 as a fraction. And that makes sense because even in percentage form, we know that 25% is a quarter of 100%, so that makes sense for this problem. So what does that mean for this? That means that we can rewrite this as 8 1 over 4, and if we're dividing by a fraction, that means that we can cancel it out and we can change this to 8 multiplied by 4, because if you're dividing twice, as we can see here, we have the first division and then the second division. What we can just do is cancel out both of these if there's 2 of them and move the bottom number here on the top, and that means we can write this as x is equal to 8 times 4, or x is equal to 32. Now have a look at this example. Again, we've been asked to solve for x in this equation, and the equation this time reads 2, and then we have a set of brackets here, and inside the brackets we have x plus 6, and that is all equal to 10. So what we want to do, when we ever have a set of brackets and been asked to solve for an equation, we have to get rid of them somehow, and that's what I'm going to teach you how to do right now. To get rid of these brackets, what you have to do is multiply everything inside the bracket by whichever number is outside of the bracket and right next to it. So in this case, what we would have to do is multiply x plus 6, everything in this, by 2. So that would mean that we have to multiply x by 2, and then we have to multiply 6 by 2. So this can be written as 2 multiplied by x, or just 2x, and then we're going to add the 6 multiplied by the 2, and this here represents the 2 multiplied by the x, and this here represents the 6 multiplied by the 2, and then all of that is equal to 10. And then what we want to do is perform these multiplications. So first we want to times 2 by x, and then 6 by 2, so that would be 2x plus 6 times 2 is equal to 12, and that is all equal to 10. And then what we want to do now is bring this plus 12 over to the other side, because we want all of the sole numbers over to the right hand side first, and because it's plus 12 on this side, it's going to move over and become minus 12. So we can write this as 2x is equal to 10 minus 12, and if we take away 12 from 10, that's going to give us a negative number. So 10 minus 12 is going to give us minus 2, and if 2x is minus 2, what we have to do is take the other 2 over to the other side, and because it's being multiplied by on this left hand side, when we bring the 2 over, it's going to be divided by the minus 2, so that would mean that x is equal to minus 2 divided by 2, and that would then mean that x is equal to minus 1. So this sort of question might be a little confusing to you if you haven't done much equations before, because for example, in this line here you might have been asking yourself, why did I do both of the multiplications first? So why did I do the 2 times x and then the 6 times 2 before using the plus sign at all? And that's what we're going to address right now. How do we sort of pick the order of how we solve or do things in an equation? So a really good way of remembering the order of how to solve things in an equation is by memorising this thing called BODMAS. If you can remember this word and everything that it stands for, then it's going to make solving equations a lot easier. And what BODMAS represents is that when we solve an equation, we always begin by solving out the things at the top and work our way to the bottom. So that would mean that when we have an equation, the first thing that we want to do is, if the equation contains a set of brackets, which we know what it looks like now, and we have something in the middle here, we want to get rid of them as soon as possible. If it contains a bracket in the equation, that is the first thing that we get rid of. Now the second thing we get rid of in BODMAS is this thing called order, and all that means is if we have any number, so let's say 2, if we have any number that is squared, or if we have any number that's being squared, that is the next thing that we want to get rid of. And then we have division and multiplication together, so anything that's being divided by, so let's say 3 divided by 6, or anything that's being multiplied by, let's say 3 times 6, this is the next thing that we get rid of when solving equations. And the last thing is we have anything that's being added together or subtracted, that is the last thing in BODMAS. So if you have 2 plus 2 or a 2 minus 2 in the equation, they are the last two things that we go to solve. So to recap, we begin with brackets, then we get rid of any squared or square roots, which is called order, and then any division or multiplication signs, and then finally we get rid of the addition and subtraction signs. So what we're going to do now is, the example that we had previous, we're going to do it again to see if it's easier for us to understand by looking at this thing called BODMAS, so we know what to do first in order to solve for x. So we know straight away we have this set of brackets, and that is the first thing that we want to get rid of here on the left hand side. To get rid of the brackets, we know that we want to multiply everything that's inside the bracket, so x plus 6, by this thing that's outside the bracket, the number. So that means that we'll have 2x, or 2 times x, and then we have the 2 times 6, and that's equal to 10. So then working our way down the BODMAS thing, we know that we don't have any square numbers or square root numbers, so we can forget about that. We don't have any numbers being divided by at the moment, but what we do have are two multiplications, well, one here and one here, and that's what we do before we do any addition or subtraction. So we begin with the multiplication. So on the left hand side we already have 2x, and then we do the multiplication first of 2 times 6, and that's 12, all equal to 10. Then what we have now is, what we want to do is have all the numbers on the right hand side and the letter by itself on the left. So what we want to do is bring this 12 over to the other side, and if it's plus on the left hand side, it's going to become minus on the right hand side, and we know that 10 minus 12 is minus 2. So that means that 2x is minus 2, and then what we want to do now is bring this 2 over to this other side, and it's being times by on the left. So what does that mean? It means divided by on the right, so the 2 moves across and comes down here, and we know that if we divide minus 2 by 2, we get an answer of minus 1. So I hope that time it was a little bit easier to understand how we solve this kind of equation, and if we can remember this thing called BODMAS, we can remember how to properly solve things in the right order when trying to get an equation to what we want of this variable x. Okay, so have a look at this final example here. An example like this is more complicated than you're going to get in the National 4 exam, so if you can do this and follow along with me, then your algebra and equation skills are more than fine to sit the exam. So we're being asked to solve for x once again, and our equation this time is 3, then we have a set of brackets, and inside we have x squared plus 9, outside the bracket minus 20, and all of that is equal to 82. So if we remember BODMAS, the first thing that we have to consider are brackets in solving the equation, and we can see here we have this set of brackets, so first thing that we want to do is get rid of them. And how do we do that? We multiply each thing in the bracket by the number that's directly outside it, so that in this case is 3, because it's 3 multiplied by the whole bracket. That would be 3 multiplied by x squared would just be 3x squared, and then we have 3 multiplied by the 9 that's inside the bracket, and then we have the minus 20, and all of that is equal to 82. Now the next thing that we have to consider is order, and the only sort of power that we have is this thing of x squared, but we can't solve for x squared unless we rearrange the equation, so we forget about it if the square or the square root is part of the x, and we save that till the end. So the next thing is multiplication and division, and we can see here that if we look at our equation, we have this multiplication right here, which is 3 times 9, so that is the next thing that we're going to solve. So we can say that 3x squared plus, so we have 3 times 9 is equal to 27 minus 20, and that is equal to 82. Now the next thing that we have to consider is addition and subtraction, and we want to focus on now bringing all the numbers over to the right hand side. So what we have here on the left hand side is 3x squared, and then we have 27 minus 20, which we can do now. So 27 take away 20 gives us 7, and all of that is equal to 82. And now again we want to go ahead and solving the equation by bringing all the numbers over to the right hand side. So what we can then say is 3x squared is equal to 82 minus 7, because what we've done is we've taken this 7 over to the right hand side and it's become minus 7, and 82 minus 7 gives us 75. So that then means that 3x squared is equal to 75, and now what we want to do is bring this 3 over to the right hand side, and because it's being multiplied by x squared, it's going to then be divided by on the right hand side. So that will become x squared is equal to 75 divided by 3. Now what we have to do is solve 75 divided by 3, and we know that 25 goes into 75 3 times. We have 25, 50, then 75, that's 3 times. So 75 divided by 3 is 25. So then we're left with x squared is equal to 25. And then what we want to do now is get rid of this squared value. We want to get rid of this here. And the way to do that is by taking the square root of both sides, because that will just leave us with a value of x, because if we take the square root and the square of the same number, both of them cancel out, so that will give us the value of x. But then that also means that we have to take the square root of 25. So I'll show you what I mean. We can then say that x is equal to the square root of 25, which is just another way of saying that x times x is equal to 25, so x must be the square root of 25. And we know that what we have to think of, what times by itself gives us 25, and we know that 5 times 5 gives us 25, so that means that x is equal to 5. So just to recap, what we did first was get rid of the brackets. We then did the multiplications, as we can see here, and then we dealt with the additions and subtractions here. And the rest of the problem involved moving all of the numbers over to the right hand side and isolating x by itself, and that gave us a value of x equals 5. So we've covered a lot in this lesson, so let's recap what we've learned about equations. So our number one goal when solving an equation is to have the variable, normally x, by itself on the left hand side, or in other words in the form of x equals something. And that means all of the other numbers within the equation, we want them over to the right hand side, and the way we do that is by changing the sign once we've changed the side. And here are the main examples of how we do this. So plus becomes minus, minus becomes plus, times becomes divide, divides becomes times, and then we now know that if we have something that's being squared, we take it over to the other side, it becomes the square root. And then finally we learned that to simplify our equation so that we can bring all of the numbers over to the right hand side, we can use this thing called BODMAS to help us remember the way to carry out things in order. So we begin by the brackets, we then get rid of any square or square roots from the order, we then look at any division or multiplication, and then we can deal with addition and subtraction. Once we've worked our way down BODMAS, we can then bring all of the numbers over to the right hand side and then achieve our number one goal of having x in this form by itself. As always, if this video has been helpful to you, be sure to give us a like, it will help us out a lot on the channel. And if you have any questions, make sure and drop them down below. And if you aren't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and if you want more content like this, you can head to penguin-learning.com. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next National 4 Maths video.